Hi everyone and welcome to Bioequestrian. Have you ever realized that when a saddle isn't properly fitted to you, it can damage your seat and contribute to an injury? When did this thought first occur to you? Let us know in the comments down below, and in today's video we will focus on this together. But first, a little surprise. We're going to take the advantage of a unique opportunity to torment an outside rider. Julia is not familiar with our saddles, so the difference will be more apparent. We are fortunate that our horse took a long time to find his saddles, and they both fit him quite well. Kate had to temporarily reduce her priorities a bit in the process, because we had to put our horse's comfort before the rider. What is the saddle on the horse for then, and how to choose a saddle for the rider? Let's start with the size of the saddle itself, and we'll come back to what the horse needs the saddle for in a moment. Most often you will hear that the seat size depends on the weight of the rider. Well, technically that's true, but not really. There is certainly some correlation here, but in our opinion, however, it has more to do with the height than the weight. And at number 1, we've got the size. Most riders use 17 to 17.5 inch saddles or 43 to 44.5 centimeter saddles. How is that measured? Maybe I'll surprise some people, but diagonally from the side of the front pommel to the center of the back cantle. Admittedly, this is a bit like saying that most riders wear shoes in size 38 to 39. We'll get to that in a moment. By the way, let's take another look at the seat depth. Why are some saddles flatter and others deeper? Well, and what is then done with the size? Today we will focus on English saddles. There are differences in different parts of the world. For example, American Western saddles are measured a little differently. We'll come back to the seat size in a moment. Now let's recognize that our bottom is supposed to be comfortable while riding. The idea behind the saddle itself is that we are to seat the pelvis steadily on 3 of its points at the right place of the saddle and over the horse's center of gravity. That is to say, it is very important that the saddle fits the horse and has such a place in general. It must have a horizontal part for sitting. If the saddle is too narrow for the horse, the front pommel lies too high and then we slide towards the back. You naturally close the hip joints so as not to slide off and squeeze the horse with the knees to keep the whole body in place. If the saddle is too big for the horse, on the contrary, we bump into the front pommel. Although this situation occurs less often because it simply rubs the horse's back. The fact that the saddle is not good for the horse does not mean that it is not good for the rider and vice versa. That's why it's so hard to match them to the whole pair. A bit like common shoes. If you want to check for yourself how your saddle is currently fitted to the horse, you can find a short video on that on our channel. Remember that the horse during its life changes its conformation and sometimes the saddle needs to be readjusted. At number 2, we've got the woman's or men's question. So we have a saddle that fits the horse and we plant the rider's pelvis on it. We use different parts of the pubic bone to do this, so we're looking for a place in the saddle where the points of our pubic bone lie freely on the seat, meaning we don't have the seams of the saddle stuck in the bottom. So there you have it. Let's have a look at men's and women's bicycle saddle. You can see the difference, right? That's because this pelvic structure is different. Most of the old saddles are, let's call it, the male type. Then a lot of companies made something in the middle, not sure if it was for men or women. Often the manufacturer doesn't want to define it fully, but we usually have it in the name of the rider who signs the saddle. This may be a hint. In any case, we sit the pelvis at the deepest point of the saddle so that it is in balance. We often come across the comparison to a bucket full of water. It's cool and illustrative. If we already feel like we've fallen into something like a potty, then something with the saddle's construction is wrong. Sitting ourselves, we should have the impression that our legs are free to fall along the sides of the horse. Often, however, we already have the sensation of tension and we don't actually realize it. The exception is Western saddles, which are designed differently, and in this video we kind of exclude them. And moving on to our point number 3, we've got the width from right to left. Let's have a look at a very interesting hip and lumbar muscle. Unfortunately, it likes to get injured and also likes to mess up a lot in our seat. See how thin this lower attachment is? The saddle is also, to a large extent, there to help this muscle. If the rider is not very stretched and exercised, he should know that he will not be able to suddenly force this muscle to freely embrace this barrel-like shape and properly maintain the posture of the spine at the same time. Let's see how the saddle is useful for the rider here. You can easily see the higher the saddle is designed, the narrower the hip position the rider can have. We'll also get to that question of what this saddle is supposed to give the rider in a moment, but let's stay with the hip alignment for now. When choosing a saddle for yourself, it is worth considering how far we can afford to stretch this muscle without limiting its functionality. If we don't take this into account, the body will of course defend itself. It will close our hip joints by sitting as if we were in a chair with our knees and toes out. Oftentimes in bareback we see this more clearly when the top of the rider sits upright as much as possible and the legs are ahead of the whole body. Of course, bareback riding helps stretch the muscles called thigh adductors and thus allows a more relaxed seat. But we note here that such a seat, especially on a very round horse, is terribly far from correct. On a skinny horse, it's even worse because the rider is uncomfortable and in addition, the horse has all the weight placed on the spine instead of the muscles around it, and usually lets its irritation be known. So it's worth checking out our seat bareback and stretching certain muscles in order to get precision in the saddle. If we already have more or less defined our current range of motion of the hips sideways, as in the splits, let's consider in which direction our education will progress. If we know that we will be riding more and more and the body is young and functioning well, we can assume that we will stretch and work out this muscle for a saddle that requires a more vertical leg position. If, on the other hand, we are going to be riding recreationally for ourselves, for now at least, and want pure pleasure, let's choose a saddle that is a little too narrow for our abilities. It will leave more room for the hips without losing the advantages of the saddle. We'll come back to this in a moment. At number 4, we've got the seat depth. Let's return for a moment to the depth of the seat. Its design is supposed to support the functioning of the previously mentioned hip and lumbar muscle. The greater its mobility we need, the more freedom the seat should leave, and the flatter or shallower it will be. That's why jumping saddles, especially for those high jumps, are so flat. On the other hand, if we want a better translation of the force resulting from the use of this muscle, which by the way is quite frail, to the whole body of the horse, the greater the bending of the seat we need. This is the answer to why dressage saddles are so deep. A petite rider, too, will usually prefer a saddle that is at least semi-depth, because then their small mass has a better effect on the horse's body, because there is a greater ratio of force. There is also a difference in the length of the horizontal seating area. Usually in jumper saddles, it is longer. On the one hand, it gives the rider more room to move while still remaining in the best point of the saddle, and on the other hand, the curved seats of dressage saddles are also more precise. Again, I will appeal to the laws of physics. Let's see how it compares. If the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection and the plane looks somewhat curved, then how will the rider act on the horse depending on where he sits? We will try to draw this. Let's also see what happens if the rider is less precise and let's say accidentally sits in the saddle. If he or she bounces while posting, for example, slightly toward the front or back, this is the reason why in very precise saddles we have the impression that we don't know how to ride. At number 5, we've got precision. That's right, precision. We want to eventually achieve precision while riding. In the later stages of learning, we find that the thighs and knees are needed to achieve this. Every saddle has a precise place for the knee in its design. We are committed to using as much as possible of the performance that the saddle should offer, so we don't discuss the knee placement point. Well, and this is where the second secret of sizing comes in. If your thigh bones are too long and your knee comes out too far forward or downward, as you sit at the deepest point of the saddle, then it's sized too small for you. If you are a short person and you have short thigh bones, you may not reach the right point. Then the saddle is too big. And theoretically, it is possible to dance for an hour in too small or in too big shoes. But let's look at what will happen to our seat in the long term. In a saddle that is too big, we can take a look at Julia in a dressage saddle that is too bulky for her. The seat point is a bit too far back and the knee does not reach the right point. Julia has two choices. Either she can move back and straighten her whole leg, in which case she will stay a bit behind the horse's center of gravity and close her hips to catch up with him, or she will want to shorten the stirrups to stabilize the center of gravity by letting the knee go forward, as the knee also weighs a bit, and thus lose the precision and assistance of the saddle that she expected to receive. Either way, the hip joints will do what they like best, which is to close in on a constant, comfortable, and stationary flexion, thus forcing other parts of the body to hang loosely. We'll return to this in an upcoming video with the working title "Do These Legs Have to Swing Like That?" If the saddle is too small, the rider can either stick his knees out in the front of the saddle flaps, thus the saddle does not really have any precise purpose except for holding the stirrups. He can also lengthen the stirrups and place the knees below the optimal point, pretending that he is dealing with a dressage saddle. The second solution makes a little more sense, usually. Well, unless we are jumping, then the trouble begins. Then too, we generally have to deal with swinging legs. The saddle is not always the cause, but tall people should consider it. Both situations, however, lead to an imbalance of the whole body seriously enough that the hip joints will set up a permanent bend in most cases. The result will be swinging of either the calves or the upper half of the body. You can see from our example that Julia was much more comfortable in the size of the smaller jumping saddle. For Kate, on the other hand, a larger jumping saddle would be useful because in this one seemingly everything is fine, but we have the impression that she stays behind in the jump, and it is the seat that is a bit too short. And yes, in this smaller jumping saddle, it is more difficult for her to keep her calf in one place. Also see what leg length different saddles offer. Here we have Julia's stirrups from a dressage and a jumping saddle. Also, that previously discussed parameter, that is the amount of flat space in the saddle, will matter as it affects the strength and precision of the thigh and knee. This will come in handy not only in lateral gaits but also in jumping, for example for tightening a turn or landing on the right lead. You'll find a bit about this in the video on the 2-point and on improving the control over the horse. At number 6, we've got the thigh and knee action. We propose a sudden twist at this point. We have been looking at all this mostly from the side, right? Let's have a look at the situation from the front, paying attention to the position of the thighs precisely. You can also check out our video on lateral work. There we talk a little more about affecting the horse with the thigh and knee. Here, in order to have more options, it is good to have enough slack and at the same time stable support, a bit like in sports shoes, for example. To increase the strength of this part of the leg from the hip to the knee, we can slim the horse down, but we will not change his chest and the bend of the ribs will remain as it was. What can we do then? Well, there is a way to do it, which not many riders remember and think about on a regular basis. You can increase the space between the rider and the horse. See what happens to the space in such a situation. Here we come to a certain property of the saddle on which depends how it helps the rider to act on the horse. This is where models of the saddles usually differ from one another. In general, the more you need to move your horse to the sides, the more this parameter will be crucial for you. It is always a choice between being close to the horse and strong and precise thigh action. At the same time, this close to the horse does not at all mean a lack of space. The so-called close contact saddles are just supposed to be strongly precise, and by increasing these forces, they simply transfer more commands to the horse. At the same time, you cannot make mistakes in them because the horse will feel them very intensely. At number 7, we've got the knee rolls. Well, and it's that thigh precision that usually requires two things: awareness of exactly where it works and stability at times when it doesn't work. Super advanced riders can usually handle this, but for ease of use, everyone uses smaller or larger knee rolls in the saddle. Part of the purpose of this is to give a reference point for where exactly we are acting and sometimes how far we are moving the calf back. We'll come back to this in a moment. That is, the blocks in the saddle are not there to keep the rider in the saddle, but to allow the rider to act as needed. It is usually the case that this knee roll at the front of the saddle is designed to stabilize the position of the rider's thigh. In modern saddles, it is usually above the knee, limiting the possibility of moving the thigh up or forward and up. Depending on the freedom and needs, in dressage we usually like to have the thigh as close to the vertical as possible and the hip joint open, so it's nice if the thigh can't release too easily from this position without warning the rider that the hips are being closed. In jumping, we prefer the freedom to move the thigh and knee, so this knee roll is a little flatter. Older models usually had a place to rest the knee. You will still meet fans of this solution. The pad at the back of the leg, on the other hand, is mostly to restrict the calf from sliding backwards. Moving on to number 8, we've got freedom of the calves. The calves should affect the horse and not the saddle. Ideally, they should be below the saddle pad. And yes, probably at this point we are all thinking about the same thing. That is the poor children riding in saddles that are too big. At the beginning of learning, this is not a huge issue, but children riding independently is already a bit of a problem in a too big saddle, mainly because the rider whose action with the calf was not met with any reaction from the horse rides with his whole body instead of the calf itself. So they tend to move the whole upper half of the body, often with the leg jammed into the saddle and very often hanging on the reins for support. But how are we supposed to learn the sense of using our calves through such a thick layer? So what about this freedom? The saddle is supposed to provide adequate space for the calf, so that it can rest in the stirrup in a natural position, possibly without using muscle strength to do so. This is exactly under the horse's center of gravity. In addition, so that the horse can feel every shift of the calf as precisely as possible. This is why dressage saddles have long girth straps and short girths, so that the calf touches the horse and not the girth. Well, what if the rider weighs more? The small hip and lumbar muscle is easily overloaded, so it's worth thinking about a saddle that will have some unique traits. The space the rider sits in, even with a wide range of mobility of the hips, will be smaller than in the case of a leaner rider. Keeping that in mind, we also need to leave some extra room in the saddle for the rider to be able to open and close their hips, so that the body can easily protect the hips. What we usually get here is a rather versatile saddle, so that there is a longer flat section, a semi-depth seat so that the hip and lumbar muscle is protected, a little and not overloaded, and not too large knee rolls to stabilize the leg. I'm sorry to say this, but the so-called orthopedic firmly holding knee rolls can rather only afford very thin people. This is because the weight of their upper body compared to the strength of the hip lumbar muscle will be small enough not to cause its injury. On the other hand, it is better for such a skinny person to stabilize a little by force than to shoot us out of the saddle and, at the very least, a fortunate moment. Moving on to a brief summary. At first glance, both Julia and Kate are of similar height, so the saddle size for them should be similar. As we can see, this is not quite true. If the saddle is too big on you, your bottom will move back, your legs will move forward, and you will not be able to sit with your lower body over the horse's center of gravity. We will add a slightly exaggerated situation here. Of course, there is still the option that the rider will remain behind the horse's center of gravity. This is also not good. In a saddle that is too small, the opposite. The knee will have to fight for its place, so it will move the calf backward, and the body will also lean because it will have to rescue this imbalance of the lower parts with alignment of the upper parts. In most situations, such a lesson will at best result in closing and stiffening the hips. Note that we are talking all the time about the problems of fitting the saddle to the rider, but assuming that the saddle fits to the horse. Unfortunately, mismatches often occur here as well. There is a video on the channel about how to check the fit of the saddle to the horse with a simple method at home. We encourage you to take a look there as well. The saddle has a task, not only to distribute the weight of the rider's body on the horse's back evenly and comfortably for the animal, a bit like a backpack on a frame. It is also intended to seat the rider over the horse's center of gravity and help maintain this position, support and relieve the hip and lumbar muscles, increase the precision of the seat aids, and increase the precision of the calf aids. We consider all these aspects every time we change a saddle. We try to determine what we expect from each saddle and which requirements it meets. It is not always possible to achieve everything. Also think about these exceptions if you are giving up using a saddle. Think not only about your ambitions, but also about the comfort of the horse in this situation. Moving on to the pro tip, you will never win with improperly fitted equipment. However, if it is matched to the horse, it will not prevent you from doing your job while riding and will even highlight the most important mistakes very often. On the other hand, constant riding in a saddle that does not fit the rider will cause mistakes 100% of the time. When choosing a saddle, your habits often play a role. If you have been using a saddle mismatched to the horse or to yourself for a long time for riding and have found somewhat of a balance, you will be terribly uncomfortable in a fitted saddle. In such situations, it is a good idea to look back at some videos and determine if your seat improves. Today we will also add a cool life hack, how to make yourself dressage stirrup leathers. Sometimes with a long leg, the place of the stirrup buckle simply bothers you because it is under the thigh. It often bothers dressage riders a lot. What can be done here? For example, we put a hair elastic on the stirrup leather, something that will be our loop. We move the buckle of the stirrup leather all the way down to the stirrup, put the end of the strap through the extra space in the buckle. We use the prepared elastic as a loop. Such a stirrup leather will withstand loads and the buckle will not bruise your thigh. Let us know in the comments down below at what point did such a thought occur to you that your mistakes may be caused by a mismatched saddle. All the videos we referenced will be linked in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you liked the video, and see you guys soon.